What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another episode of Hot Takes. Once again, I took to Twitter and asked for your hottest NBA takes, this time heading into the offseason. The draft is in a few days. We've got free agency right around the corner, and moves have already started to be made with the Thunder, of course, trading for Alex Caruso. So the NBA offseason is in full swing, and I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and get some of y'all's opinions. These takes could be about how the draft will go, how free agency trades will go. Even some of these takes have to do with going into next season because it's never too early to make some of those predictions. But yeah, I picked out some of my favorite ones. I'm going to tell you what I think about them and exactly why I agree or disagree with that take. We'd love to hear your opinions on these takes as well down below in the comments, and drop some of your own original hot takes too. It's always fun to go ahead and debate those in the comments. With that being said, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos, and let's get into the takes. First take comes from Brome, I believe, who says that the Miami Heat can run it back and compete with the Celtics in the East if health complies. Right off the bat, I'm going to say I don't agree with this one whatsoever. Last offseason, I made a video basically saying that the Heat were in trouble, how they didn't do nearly enough to compete with some of the teams in the Eastern Conference that made additions that were already right there with them because they had just made that miraculous run to the finals as an 8 seed, but it felt like that would be really hard to replicate, and that's what happened. They were once again in the playoffs as the 8 seed, and they lost the Boston Celtics in a sweep. Now, I know Jimmy Butler didn't play in that series, nor did Terry Rozier, and maybe if those guys are playing, it's a little more interesting, but I don't see that series going more than 5 or 6 games. I still think the Celtics were by far the best team in the East, as well as the NBA as a whole. So, sure, maybe the Heat can have more success if they run it back. Maybe they could win a playoff series, but I don't think the Heat, as currently constructed, can compete with the Boston Celtics whatsoever. I think they have to make additions. They've stayed too complacent for too long. Even if it's just adding some role players, I do think eventually they're going to have to trade for a big-name star to get themselves over the hump with how much better the East and the NBA as a whole are getting, but at least just get some type of improved role players. Help Jimmy Butler out at least a little bit, because it's been too long where the Heat have kind of just run this thing back over and over, and it still doesn't feel like they're closer to actually winning the title. Next, we've got a take from Wizards Muse, who says that Ja Morant will make an all-NBA team, and the Grizzlies are going to go to the conference finals. I don't think this is that crazy of a take whatsoever. I agree that Ja Morant will make an all-NBA team. I'm imagining a big bounce-back year from him after last season. Of course, there was a suspension. Then he played a few games that looked really good, and then he got hurt and missed the rest of the season. He's got a lot of time now to rest going into next year. I think Ja Morant is going to have a massive bounce-back revenge campaign in 2024-2025. As for the Grizzlies making the conference finals, I do think that's very possible. That team is really good, especially if they make some moves in the offseason like it seems like they're angling to do, but we'll have to wait and see because the West is extremely deep between, of course, the Mavericks. You've got the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder. I'm sure some of the other teams that weren't in that second round are going to make some moves as well. So we'll have to wait and see on the conference finals thing, but I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation when you consider how good the Grizzlies were the last time they were healthy. Then we've got a take from Quentin, who says that Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to request a trade. I'm guessing Quentin means this offseason, and with that, I don't agree, but it wouldn't surprise me if by next summer, say the Bucks are floundering, maybe they make some moves this offseason, they flip one or both of Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez to try and reshape the supporting cast, and it just doesn't work. Maybe Dame doesn't find his footing, or they're still not good enough to compete with Boston. They're now completely exhausted of all their assets and resources to improve the team. Maybe Giannis doesn't outright request a trade, but it kind of makes it known that, hey, you know, I want to be competitive, make moves now, or else I am going to walk. And with the Bucks being so stuck, because again, at that point, they would have no assets. They already don't have any. I could see it becoming a real possibility that Giannis Antetokounmpo isn't a Buck after too much longer. Now, I'm hoping he is because I like to see guys have that one-team arc. I think Giannis feels like a one-team type of guy who wants to stay in Milwaukee. But the Bucks last season with Dame, it didn't go the way we were picturing. It felt like that was the move that was going to keep Giannis in Milwaukee forever. Now things feel a bit more up in the air. We'll have to wait and see, though. I just don't think it's realistic to expect a request of a trade this offseason or really even during next season. But next summer, maybe things could be a little bit more up in the air. Then we've got a take from ISOJ, who says that JJ Redick is going to be fired by the Lakers mid-season. Yeah, JJ Redick is the Lakers head coach. If you didn't know, I didn't make a specific video for it on this channel. I was going to, and then the Josh Giddey, Alex Caruso news dropped, so you know I had to cover that. But I don't see this happening. The Lakers have had too much coaching turnover, going from Luke Walton and then Frank Vogel and then Darvin Ham all over the course of LeBron's tenure here in Los Angeles. It's been a lot. I feel like JJ Redick is the guy they're really going to stick with. Now, unless something insane happens, like all of a sudden he loses the locker room or there's some falling out. But apparently they really gauge Anthony Davis's interest in JJ Redick. He had a podcast with LeBron. I don't know if they're going to keep that going throughout the season. I'd be kind of surprised if they did, but hey, it would make for good content, especially imagine they have a big loss and we get a podcast episode. But that to me shows that LeBron and JJ are close. Apparently Anthony Davis likes him. They seem to be all on board. Now, it might be different if the Lakers really start struggling, then questions start to pop up, but I don't think he'll be fired mid-season. I think they at least give him a couple of years, then maybe we'll see how it goes, but I think JJ Redick's job is pretty safe, barring some insane circumstances, for at least the first season or two. Next up is a take from my guy Jack, who says that if Morey gets it right, the Sixers will win the championship next season. This is definitely a bold one. Again, the Boston Celtics are out in the Eastern Conference, so that itself makes it really difficult. But I will say this is probably the Sixers' best chance to put the perfect supporting cast around Joel Embiid. Maxey last season became an all-star, all-NBA level player. He's going to get a bag this offseason, get about 5 years. I think $205 million is the exact number. And he's probably the best fitting supporting player that Embiid has ever had. He is really, really good. The two of them work fantastic as a duo. The question is, how do they put the right team around them? And they have basically all the roster spots in the world. They have a ton of cap space. This is their offseason. If they're ever going to make it happen, they have to do it now. They could go for a third star, whether it's like a Paul George, although reports are they're backing off of going after him a little bit. They could go after another wing player through a trade, like a Brandon Ingram, for example. That's a name that's been brought up here and there. They could go after Jimmy Butler. If he doesn't want to stay with the Miami Heat, that's been something that's circulated for a little bit. Or they could just go the route of adding a bunch of great supporting players. They could bring back Kelly Oubre. They could go after great role players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a name that we've seen be brought up a little bit in some league circles. If the Nuggets don't bring him back, Sixers have some interest, and I'd love that fit over there in Philly. There are a lot of routes they can go, but one thing I will agree with Jack is here, this is maybe the most pivotal offseason the Sixers have had in a really long time, because if they fumble all this cap space and all the roster spots in the world, I just don't see how the Sixers reach a championship winning level. I don't know if anything they do will like guarantee them the championship this offseason or make them the favorites past Boston, but there are a lot of routes they can go to make themselves maybe that bona fide number two. And hey, I guess anything can happen when you get to the playoffs, especially if Embiid can actually stay healthy. Next take comes from Thread Killer OKC, who says that the Thunder will sign Paul George and draft a backup big. Edie would be fun, but Filipowski is probably more likely. I'll start with the not nearly as high of a take aspect of that in the Thunder drafting a backup big. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There have been a bunch of names thrown around whether the Thunder trade up and try and go after like a Donovan Clingan or someone like that, or if they stay at their spot, they even could trade down a little bit and get like a Deron Holmes and even Messi. They could go for a Khalil Ware. There's a lot of backup bigs you could go with. I think that's very possible. Even Zach Edey, as was mentioned here, Kyle Filipowski. They could sign somebody. There are a lot of routes for the Thunder grabbing a backup big, so even if they don't draft one, they're going to grab some help in the front court, I would imagine. And that's where we get to the much hotter take aspect of that, which is the Thunder signing Paul George. Obviously, he was here for a couple of years. He had some of the best seasons of his career, had a top 3 MVP and DPOY finish. Paul George is really good, and it seems more likely than ever that he might end up leaving the Clippers, mainly because the Clippers have had a chance over the past week or so, roughly, to negotiate with him. They've had about a year to sign an extension with him, and nothing has come to fruition. So it seems like he may be angling his way out of Los Angeles, or this is all just leverage stuff and he ends up staying there anyways. I think that's very realistic. And things are made more interesting by the fact that Philly, like we talked about, is probably now out on Paul George. So where does he go? There are still teams out there with cap space, the Thunder being one of them. There's also the aspect of, he could just re-up on his team option, could take that and then request a trade similar to what James Harden did last season. And then that opens up more possibilities. The Knicks, the Warriors are teams that have come up over the course of the last 24 hours as potential suitors in that scenario, or OKC as well. If they want to maintain some of that cap space, they could go ahead and send out some contracts for Paul George in a trade that way. They could do a sign and trade. There are a lot of routes that the Thunder could use to get Paul George here, and I will say, I think he'd be a fantastic fit. He adds a lot more offensive punch, adds some defense. Now, the injury concerns are definitely real with Paul George, and that's a big concern, but if he can stay healthy, he would be an immaculate fit to this team. You want to talk about adding more shot creation, more playoff experience, a guy who knows Oklahoma City as well in PG. it could be a home run landing. I would not be opposed to the Thunder adding Paul George. I do think there would need to still be other stuff the Thunder do, like we talked about grabbing a backup big. But I will say, if that somehow comes to fruition, even if it's unlikely, I would be a fan. I don't think it ends up happening. But just imagine how insane it would be if the trade the Thunder made to get Shea, the Thunder also get back Paul George. In the end of that trade, they get the Clippers picks, they get Shea, they get Paul George a few years later. I can't even imagine the way that NBA Twitter and the NBA world as a whole will react if that's something that actually happens. And our last hit comes from Lay Caruso, says that the Pacers are fraudulent. If the East was half as healthy, they would have been a first-round exit, and they won't win another series during this Pascal Siakam contract. The Siakam contract he's talking about is over the next 4 years. They just re-upped him on a 4-year deal, which is huge for them. I love the Siakam trade when they made it. They, of course, went on a deep playoff run to the Eastern Conference Finals with him in town. It made sense for both sides to go ahead and stick with each other. That's what's going to happen. And I don't agree with this take whatsoever. Now, sure, you can argue that if the Bucks were fully healthy, the Pacers have a good shot of losing that first-round series. I would say if the Bucks had Giannis and Dame fully healthy, they would have won that matchup. Sure, you can say that. But the Pacers still had to go ahead and get the job done. They still had to beat the Knicks. They had one of the best shooting performances in playoff history against the Knicks in Game 7 in Madison Square Garden. And when they faced the Celtics, sure, they got swept, but it was a really close sweep. There weren't all these blowouts. Even when Tyrese went down with injury, they held their own. And a lot of that was guys outside of Halliburton, like Siakam, who was amazing in that run. Andrew Nembhard really rose his public perception with this playoff run. A lot of people think he could be a star in the making. Not to mention role players like an Aaron Nesmith, for example. Obi Toppin had some big moments. Miles Turner had one of the best seasons of his career. This Pacers team, to me, is only getting started. Sure, the East is good, and they were young, and maybe they would have lost in the first round this year with everybody healthy. But at the same time, I just don't see a way where they don't win a single series for the rest of this Siakam contract. There are so many avenues for them to get better. Again, they're really young. This was their first time having Siakam here, and it was only half a season, and they made the Eastern Conference Finals. Give them a full year with everybody healthy, with Tyrese not dealing with injury for basically the second half of the season. And I think the Pacers will once again be one of the better teams in the East. I don't think they honestly get enough credit for what they did this season, and once they got to the playoffs, too many people are using the injury excuse when in reality, the Pacers are just a really good team in general. But yeah, with all that being said, those are my thoughts on these hot takes. Once again, would love to hear your opinions down below in the comments, some of your own hot takes. A lot of content coming up here soon, a lot of different content, some stuff that I'm excited about, especially with free agency right around the corner and the draft. It's going to be a lot of fun, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. Like I said earlier, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I appreciate you watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.